So what we've been exploring is this entry into a new world space, into a new tier. This is a new ontology. Remember, ontology is the study of what is reality, what is real. Each world space, each tier is unpacking that question in its own unique way. So when we enter into the MetAware, we're entering into a whole new sense of what reality is. And some of it involves melting away some of the previous certainties.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Integral Edge, hosted by Integral Life. My name is Keith Martin Smith, and I am the author most recently of When the Buddha Needs Therapy. I work as a developmental editor for people who are writing usually pretty complex books on complex topics. And I'm very excited today to have my friend and colleague here, Alexander Love. Alexander is an acupuncturist and a developmental coach and a facilitator. He's the director of curriculum development at the Newfield Network, which is an international coach training organization. He's the creator of the Lumina process, which is a shadow work modality, shadow work and Eastern wisdom and integral theory. And he's currently working on a trilogy, Evolutionary Gestures, which is really sort of a combination of a personal memoir, a deep dive into Chinese medicine and wisdom and philosophy, and integral theory and developmental psychology. So, Alexander, it's great to have you back on the show. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. So glad to be here with you.
Awesome. So the last time we talked, we took a pretty deep dive into the stages model, which was developed by Terry O'Fallon, and it's one of, maybe a dozen or 20 developmental models that are in the world today, maybe more than that I know of. And, you and I have both been students of Terry's for a long time, and her model offers some really kind of unique contributions and unique insights into developmental psychology. And so in the last one, we really took a deep dive going through her entire model, basically from birth up until what integralists would call teal, or the integral viewpoint, which is the point at which we can sort of see some differentiation, see the frame that we're using, see development, all these sort of interesting things that come online. And today the promise is to go into Terry's 5.0, or what would be kind of turquoise in the integral model, where some of the spiritual states and the ego stages begin to coalesce. But before we go there, I thought it would be helpful to just give an overview of the stages model again, sort of what makes it unique, and maybe just do a little drive-by of the different developmental levels that she's come up with. And I'll go ahead and share a map for everybody so this isn't so abstract.
Yeah, so why don't we take as Keith said, let's just take a brief move through these stages to get a sense of what this model can open up for us. And to begin with, what I want to do is start with looking at person perspectives. So what is a person perspective? We can look at this word epistemology, which is essentially looking at how do we know things? What are the lenses through which we know? How do we make meaning? And there are multiple ways in which we make meaning. But a person perspective, I like to think of it as sort of the deep structure of how we make sense of things. And of course, in an evolutionary context, this deep structure of how we make meaning, it grows up. And as it grows up, we're able to take more and more perspectives. We're able to hold more complexity. And I want to be clear that also, when we say perspectives, I'm not just talking about sort of a cognitive perspective, because we can't separate the cognitive perspective from our entire being, the way that we feel, the depths of our direct experience. And so I just want to have us keep that in mind as we're exploring. And so the way that this model numbers each of the developmental waves is in relationship to a person perspective. So what Terry found in her research is that there are 6 person perspectives. We can speculate that there are more, but what we have research on from real people not just a select few that are sort of writing their pontifications on a stage, which is beautiful. I mean,
Right.
I love doing that. I think a lot of us love doing that. But what Terry's done is she's gathered data from many human beings and exploring patterns in their language, which I think it offers a more collective approach to understanding, like, what are these waves? And so what she's discovered is that there are 6 person perspectives, and each perspective has an emerging aspect to it, where it's just beginning to discover what that person perspective is. And then it has a maturing aspect to that person perspective. So as we've sort of grappled with this new way of making meaning, we start to get more proficient and we start to mature. So when we look at the numbers, we can see that 1.0 is indicating that it's the first person perspective. The 0.0 indicates that it's an emerging relationship to that person perspective. 1.5 is indicating that it is also part of the first person perspective. The 0.5 indicates that it is a maturing expression of that person perspective.
Great. So that's like, I mean, sometimes you'll hear integralists, or certain developmentalists say things like, orange entrance, mature orange exit, green entrance, those sort of things, which I think are trying to sort of get to some of these ideas.
Exactly. That's right. So for example, if we just take 2.0 and 2.5, for example, 2.0 and 2.5, 2.0 is like magic, mythic, which is going to be in the blue or the amber domain. 2.5 is going to be mythic. And then 3.0 is going to be mythic rational. And then 3.5 orange is going to be rational. And so, yes, we see that with the entry and the exit. Sometimes we hear it if we're using the language like magic, mythic, mythic, rational. We can kind of hear echoes of what this is pointing to. And the other thing I'll say here is that we can look at this stages model as really the sort of the exploration of self-reflection, which is happening through human beings. So we have the world of matter and we have the world of life, which doesn't yet, for the most part, have a sophisticated, that we know of, a sophisticated capacity for self-reflection. And so what starts to happen is, as we enter into the human world, we begin to reflect on who we are, what we are, as an extension of the cosmos. And this includes the fact that we are in space and we are in time. And what this looks like in the stages is that when you see a 0.0, we're exploring more of the space dimension of being human. That means we're more in the moment. Think about 1.0, a little baby. They're just in the moment, receiving the world. Whereas 1.5, the 0.5s are going to be more time oriented. There's more of an action orientation. There's more of a trajectory that begins to unfold. And so we start to see through all the person perspectives, there's a continued sort of moving back and forth between developing our relationship to being in the moment, 0.0, and developing our relationship to more being in time, recognizing that we're unfolding in some way, in a more active trajectory-like way.
Right. Okay, so great. So maybe you could just give us 2 examples of that to just illustrate it, the movement from 2.0 to 2.5 and the movement from 4.0 to 4.5. I think that might be interesting for people.
Sure.
And these, because one is concrete and one is subtle, and maybe just touch on those 2 distinctions.
Yeah. So we see that the first person perspective and the second person perspective are both part of the concrete tier. Okay? So 1.0, 1.5, 2.0, 2.5, they're part of an entire world space. And that world space makes meaning in a certain way. It sees more concrete objects. Third person perspective and fourth person perspective, they're part of the subtle world space. They're going to see a whole new ontology. They're going to see a whole new sense of what is reality. And they're going to have different perspectives in relationship to that reality that they're perceiving. So if we look at, for example, 2.0, you can think about this like 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. So
Right.
they're more in the reciprocal dynamic of friendship. Right? They're kind of in the moment with each other. Like Sally is, told on me, and Mark, I had a crush on him, but now, kids have crushes really early. It's like it's different than a high school crush, but it's like the language comes up. Oh, like I have a crush, like he doesn't like me, and someone stole my shoes, and like that's not nice, and that's against the rules, and all that kind of stuff. So they're in the moment, they're in the relational dynamic, whereas 2.5, they're going to start recognizing a hierarchy. They become more
Right.
mature. And so they're like, oh, okay, well, in this system, the Pope is at the top, and then
Right.
there's the next person in line, and then there's the next person in line, and then I figure out where I fit within that system. So now I'm able to see a hierarchy implies that there's a sense of trajectory. I'm starting to sort of rank what's higher on the trajectory, what's lower on the trajectory. Whereas 2.0, they're more sort of in the flow of it. They're more
Right.
had by
And,
it.
and so it's hard to tell which rules are. You need to follow all the rules at 2.0, but they're not really understood very hierarchically.
Right, exactly. And so I remember Terry giving the example in her experience as a teacher where they tried this thing where they would have the kids come up with their own punishments. And the kids that are in 2.0, they would come up with the craziest punishments. They'd be like, oh, like you stole a pencil, so you have to sit in the corner for 8 hours. Whereas in 2.5, they can recognize, oh, well, the punishment should fit the crime. And so there's more of a hierarchy there that it's not, there's more of an ability to sort of rank, well, you did this, you stole someone's pencil, then you need to apologize and be in timeout for 4 minutes.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
if, stole someone's rabbit or hurt someone's cat, like there's another thing needed there.
Right,
Now,
and we would see that culturally maybe in some of what would seem to be very unfair and arbitrary, harsh punishments of some cultures, versus a more mediated punishment, right? Stone someone to death because they did something, right? That's
Right, their hair was-
what,
their hair
what did
was-
they do? Yeah, they weren't wearing the right outfits. We're going to stone them to death. Well, that seems a little intense of punishment, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So now, if we look at this in the next iteration, as you were bringing up, we look at 4.0 and 4.5. So remember, 4.0 is green. 4 is the fourth person perspective. 0.0 implies that it's the emerging fourth person perspective. And just like any of us, when we're emerging into a new territory, we tend to be more receptive in the moment. Like, I don't know what's happening. I can't really be active until I've really learned something. And then I can say, okay, I'm going to do something with this. But in the beginning, we're kind of had by it. Yeah. So we can see that in 4.0, it's also a collective, 4.0 green, it's also a collective stage. But now we're able to see the subtle self, whether it's parts of the self that are in me, or I'm sitting in a circle with my friends or my community, and I'm hearing the parts of my friends. Or
This is the fourth person then.
This is the fourth person perspective. Exactly.
And that is the four. That's the difference between the 3 and the 4 is seeing the subtle self. That's part of the 4.
That's right. Right. So we're moving beyond. In the third person perspective, we have the individual self, the individual subtle self that's beginning to emerge, right? So we see that in Terry's model, she's incorporated the 4 quadrants. Mm-hmm. Right? And so what I'm talking about here is the difference between the individual and the collective. So in the third person perspective, the individual subtle self is beginning to come online. 3.0, it's the emerging of this subtle self, the emerging of the third person perspective. But then by the time I move into 3.5 orange, I have more maturity and I can become more active. So I'm going to create a course on the 7 steps to becoming happy. The 7-step process. I just got a YouTube advertisement that was like the 7-step process to business success.
Right.
right?
Whereas 3.0 would be more focused on answering the question, how am I different from the group?
Right, exactly. Who am I?
And at 3.5, it's, I know I'm different from the group. What does that mean?
Yeah, so, right, 3.0 is who am I?
Right.
As is the question of 1.0 and 5.0, right? They're going to share that. It's just who am I in the different, it's in a different world space,
Right.
right? So 3.0 is asking who am I? 3.5 says, well, I know who I am, and then what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to create something. I'm gonna do something in the world with this active, subtle self. I'm going to figure out how to do genetic modification, because I have an ownership of this subtle individual mind.
We're going to create a constitution that radically defines individual rights.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Now, this is going to differ from fourth person perspective, which is now developing the collective. Right? So the first person perspective is developing the individual in the concrete world. The second person perspective is developing the collective identity in the concrete world. The third person perspective is developing the individual identity in the subtle world space. The fourth person perspective is developing the subtle collective identity in the subtle world space. So you see how there's a way that the four quadrants are being built out a little bit at a time in the self-reflective world as a human being. Who am I as an individual? Atoms aren't asking, who am I as an individual? Who are we as a collective? Right. As we enter into self-reflection through the human world, we start asking those questions, and then the answers to those questions evolve through time and space. And so then we have the fourth person perspective, green, 4.0. Now we're going to be also had by the collective, just like 2.0 was, because
Right.
it's a 0.0. So it's more sort of being had by the situation. It's an emerging perspective. But now I might be had by all the parts of the self that are talking to me and are in conflict with each other. I might be had by all of the sharing that's happening in the group. I don't really want to take a stand. I might sort of fall into the group flow, or maybe the group think, but the group think is now much more nuanced.
Right, consensus, sort of leadership by consensus, which people that try to lead here, it's like, right, it's like let's make sure everyone has an opinion and every opinion is considered.
Right, exactly. Now, 4.5 teal, what we see here is it's still the fourth person perspective.
Right.
But the 0.5 lets us know this is the maturing aspect. So now instead of being had by the fourth person perspective or the fourth person collective, instead of that, now I'm able to see a new hierarchy, but now, if it's healthy, I can see a natural hierarchy.
Right. So this is really just like 2.0 and 2.5, where the 0.0 is by definition non-hierarchical because you're swimming in it. So
right.
We talked about you can't make those distinctions in punishment in 2.0. And in 4.0, as we know at Green, it can be difficult for people to make hierarchical distinctions around meaning, purpose, rights, equity, these kinds of things. They can get lost in the soup.
Exactly. And so where 2.0 might be like, hey, like Sally stole my shoes and that makes me really sad and I'm going to tell the teacher because that's against the rules. 4.0 green, it's you don't see me, you're gaslighting me, I feel hurt and unsafe. I'm going to tell the teacher because that goes against the rules. And so it's a different iteration of a similar deep structure. The difference being we're now in a subtle world space. Now, 4.5, fourth person perspective, 0.5 means maturing. Right. Remember, that means now I can see trajectory because it's more time. There's more of a time capacity here. So I can begin to see, perspectives grow up. Person perspectives grow up. People grow up. And they have all these parts in them, but these parts also have different ages. And those ages need to be met differently. So now I'm still playing with context, which is a huge thing that opens in the fourth person perspective as a whole. But rather than being had by the contexts, I'm now able to actively recognize that there are contexts that shape us, but I can also shape who I am and how I'm being in relationship to those contexts to best
Right.
meet the moment. So if I'm hanging out with people, so let's say I'm at a school with kids at, somewhere in 2.0, 2.5, I'm going to modulate how I'm connecting with them for the sake of understanding them and loving them deeply so that they can grow and mature in the way that's right for them, rather than a top-down kind of hierarchy, which is, I know what everybody needs. They need my, 7-step process on business success. And so now you all need to take that course because that's the way. Instead, here, there's a dynamism to 4.5 teal that allows us to shift with context and address different contexts all at once, respond differently in different moments to these different clusters.
Right. Now, there seems to be something that emerges at 4.5 teal integral that, again, it can make these hierarchical distinctions, but then what about the idea that it appears that this is the first stage that can actually begin to see and acknowledge and honor different developmental levels themselves?
Yeah, right. So, this is an interesting question because I've seen people learn about development before entering into even the subtle tier. And so I think similarly to the territory of parts work, where we can say that someone's not going to probably come up with a parts work system until 4.0 green or 4.5 teal, we can say that people can learn about development. I mean, my daughter, who's 16, she understood at 10 that, for her, Santa Claus doesn't mean the same thing that it used to, but that the little kids, they still need to be allowed to believe in Santa Claus in the way that she used to. So I think there's a way that developmental literacy can show up in healthy ways probably as early as 2.0. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the complexity of understanding nested contexts, that we have nested contexts inside of us that are these ways in which our person perspectives, to use what we've been saying here, our person perspectives are growing up, that each one is a different context and that they're nested along a continuum of the whole, that begins in 4.5 teal. Now also, we can hear that 4.0 green will sometimes reject that, but I've also heard Terry say, and I've seen this also, that if someone is introduced to development in a healthy way prior to 4.0 green, when they go through 4.0 green, it's not necessarily as punchy and acidic as sometimes we make it out to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a colleague, David Arell, who talks about something which I think it's a really interesting idea that he's beginning to flesh out. But he talks about there are 3 different value stacks: traditional, modern, postmodern, and that you can actually go through this whole process of development inside of one of those value stacks.
Absolutely.
So you're not going to go through what integralists think of as green in a way that looks anything like it if you're in a traditional or a modern value stack. Because you're not going to come up with we need to have equity and justice and we need to be tearing things, that's not going to occur to you because that's not in those value stacks. And the value stacks are independent of development, essentially.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And I see that with my clients. I've over the years, I've had a number of clients that have a very deep relationship to their spiritual tradition or their religion. And some of the sound of it is quite traditional.
Right.
But they're not, if you listen to their language and the way in which they make meaning, they're not making meaning from 2.5 amber. They have that in them as a note of a larger chord, but they're often making meaning through the third person perspective, the fourth person perspective, maybe even later. And it looks differently.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of the 15-year-old atheist, who's going to be in that modern value stack, but then holding it in a very sort of 2.0 or 2.5 amber entrance, mature amber way, which atheism is. There is no God. It's like, well, that seems a little inflexible, doesn't it? How are you so sure?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. So I think that's a really great overview and sort of walks us up to, this idea. And this is, as far as I know, a unique contribution of Terry's again, which is this idea of a MetAware tier. So this is, one of the three one of the three tiers that she talks about. And so maybe you could sort of walk us now as we're moving from 4.5 into 5.0 and how you understand that.
Yeah, so to just, summarize, we're looking here at the self-reflective human world. And these 12 waves of development are different aspects of how that human world unfolds in terms of its deep structure. The ways that the deep structure of our epistemology is growing up, how we are interacting with what our sense of reality is. We've seen that the first world space is the concrete world space. The second world space, or the second tier, is the subtle tier. And then the third is called the MetAware. Now, this MetAware tier, I've seen, has a certain amount of confusion around it. Because one of the things that needs to begin to arise as we enter into the MetAware tier is a relationship to some of these deeper states. And so what happens is, because stages and states begin to come together as a necessity for the structure of the actual wave itself, it means we have to start talking about stages and states. And this is notoriously confusing. And so what I would love to bring up here is that what I want to offer is just an opening for a conversation, because I find that there's a lot of ideas about this, a lot of confusions about this, and what I'm going to offer in our conversation is not like what I think the truth is. It's just trying to open up ways that we might look at what's already there, and then some other things that maybe aren't already out there in the integral world as strongly, so that for the next 300, 500 years, we can have a conversation about this. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll need that much time to sort out, Wilbur and Alan Combs, they were, according to Wilbur, were confused about this too, until they came up with the Wilbur-Combs lattice. And so what I'd love to do is just set up a little bit of context around how we might look at states and stages as kind of a preamble to talking about the MetAware tier.
Great.
So when we're looking at altitude, developmental altitude, we can look at it like a vertical axis. I would invite that we don't look at it like a ladder, but more like a stream that's moving upward and downward. But we can say that it's running along the vertical axis. We are beings in space. So we have height, we have width, we have breadth. And so we have depth. And so what I'd like to talk about here is the difference between height or altitude and depth.
Great.
Okay. Now we see this in the Wilbur-Combs lattice. If the listeners any of you aren't familiar with this, basically what Wilbur and Alan Combs came up with was that we have a developmental dimension that's moving upward and downward. We have a vertical axis, but then we also have a horizontal axis, which I would call the depth axis. I would encourage that sometimes folks will think about depth as down. I think it's a little misleading. If you step back from the planet Earth and you look at the ocean, when someone goes deep into the ocean, they're going in. They're not going down. It feels like we're going down, but it's actually going in, like an avocado. So now, when we're looking at states, we're looking at the depth axis. When we're looking at stages, we're looking at the altitude, the height axis. When we're looking at states, we're turning towards origin, and we're talking about what we find there. For the most part, anybody who has the capacity to look towards origin will find things that are outside of time and space. Mm-hmm. They'll find the timeless, boundless. Buddhism likes to call it empty. It's not the best word. Some people call it open. It's also not the best word. But it's an ineffable experience of, we might call the absolute dimension. It doesn't change. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at that, we can look at that and be at a number of different developmental waves. Okay, that's the territory of states. We're looking towards origin and we're describing what we see. When we turn the other way and we look at the world, what we see is a world that's evolving. So that world that we see and our perspective on it, it grows up. So that is what tells us about the developmental stages. States, I'm looking towards origin. Mm-hmm. Stages, I'm looking towards the evolving world. Mm-hmm. Now, we can be in a 2.5, 2.0, 2.5 domain and engage in practices that help
early
us.
Amber, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Amber, early Amber, magic, mythic, or mythic. Mm-hmm. We can be in those waves and turn towards origin and find it. But when we turn around and we look at the world and we start making sense of our experience,
right,
and we start interpretation of our experience, interpretation of the world, now we're looking through a person perspective. So we can go into a completely non-dual awakening experience and then come back out and say, well, here are all these rules about who's allowed to give the teachings, right, who's not allowed to give the teachings, how people should be dressed, how they should eat, all those kinds of things.
Right. It's like somebody quipped, maybe it was Ricky Gervais, but, interesting that, Krishna appears to Hindus, Jesus appears to Christians, Buddha appears to Buddhists, but making fun of the idea that, there's the interpretive lens will always take something and then sort of cram it into how you understand the world.
That's right. Now, what Terry discovered is that there are certain states that need to start arising in order for someone to enter the MetAware tier. Now, this is where often confusion starts to emerge, because someone will say something like timelessness, and the listener is like, oh, you must be talking about the MetAware. But they're not. They're talking about origin.
Right.
Now, someone who's moving through the MetAware will start using that language a lot because those states are necessary, but not necessarily sufficient, but they're necessary to enter into those places. There are plenty of people in the fourth person perspective, green and teal, that can have timelessness experiences, boundlessness experiences, non-dual experiences, full bridled heart of existence is bursting through me. All those kinds of things can happen.
And speak very eloquently and passionately about them.
Eloquently, passionately about them. What we need to look at is when they see the world, what are the evolutionary objects do they see?
So when they look back at the world from source.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what will help us begin to understand the difference between someone having an awakening experience and someone having a developmental expression. It's just in the MetAware we start to see both. So it gets really wonky because we start thinking that if someone uses the word timelessness, it must be later. And then the folks that are sort of not so sure about that, they start challenging, oh, well, this person said timelessness. How are you saying that they're in the MetAware? And actually, from a scoring perspective, from sort of like the deep perspective of the model itself, that's not what's being said. When we're looking at someone's writing, we have to see the states that are present, but we also have to see the evolutionary objects that are present. If those objects are not MetAware objects, then this person is at an earlier developmental wave having state experiences.
Okay, so then let's maybe talk about what that fifth person perspective is.
Yeah, okay. So we're in 4.5 teal. Things are going great.
You've become an insufferable integralist. You're lecturing everybody about the model.
You're right. And if you're at 4.5 teal and you haven't found integral, you're probably lecturing somebody about something. Because it's the final wave of the subtle tier, which means...
It's the 0.5.
It's a 0.5. It's the final stage. And what that means is you've developed a mature individual, subtle individual. You've developed a mature subtle collective. Those are starting to interpenetrate. You feel like you own the world in a way. And I mean that in a positive way. I mean, it can have its shadow, but it can feel like I've arrived. I know what matters. I feel purpose. I know what I want to do with it. I'm teaching people.
There's a solidity and not much doubt. That was certainly my subjective experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, we can take into account each individual is different, and there's shadows and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, there's a sense of stability there. Now, as we move into 5.0, we're engaging in a tier transition. Anytime we engage in a tier transition, it can be a little bit intense. Because, as I just mentioned, we've come to a mature sense of individual and collective identity by 4.5 teal. All of that starts to dissolve to make room for a new MetAware individual. So that's a huge thing to have dissolve.
Right. Well, if we look at the chart that's pulled up there, we can see that 4.0 to 4.5, only one thing is changing, reciprocal to interpenetrative, right? Yeah. But then as we go to 5.0, all three things are changing. It's now MetAware, it's individual, and it's receptive. So it's as big of a change as when we move from being conformist to coming out of a strictly conformist thing, which most of us remember really well because it is a really big shift.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So as we move into the MetAware, one of the states that starts to come online is transpersonal awareness. An awareness that is beyond the personal sense of self. Now, you can have transpersonal experiences prior to 5.0. It's just, in order to go into 5.0, if you never had those before, they're going to start occurring here. Now, it also does not have to be a blinding, I went to a great retreat kind of experience. It's pretty common in 5.0 that there's a transpersonal awareness that's coming online, but they don't actually know what's happening. It's not like, oh, look at that transpersonal awareness. That doesn't happen until 5.5, the next one. In 5.0, it starts to stream in, just like for the infant in 1.0. What's streaming in there is the concrete world, and they don't know what that is. So they're receiving these sensory experiences, but they don't have categories for them. They don't have names for them. They don't have meaning around it. The same thing is happening now, but with transpersonal awareness. So it's not that, it's really not necessarily like when you go to a retreat and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow. Poof. It's there and it's impacting the person, but it may not be clear to them what's happening. Things are starting to dissolve. And one of the first ways that begins to show up is with a kind of a dissolution of boundaries. Because remember, we're in time and space. I talked about how the point O's are more in the moment oriented, space oriented. The point fives are more trajectory oriented. Now all of a sudden in the MetAware, this is going to start to dissolve. It's starting to dissolve, making room for the six-person perspective, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So in 5.0, what they might notice is that people's words are kind of an illusion. They're like if I think of a client, they're like, oh, I went to work and I'm listening to everybody talk. And I'm just like, everybody's just making the whole thing up. Right. And this is different than fourth person perspective, green and teal.
Language is a construct.
It's a social construct.
Right.
We have socially constructed our
and that has bias and power and privilege embedded in it, all that sort of, which is obviously there's nested truths in that, right?
Right. And so like you gave the example of Ricky Gervais, when you say like a Buddhist sees Buddha and a Christian, sees Jesus, and he's talking about the socially constructed subtle world and how we're being impacted, our subtle world of archetypes are being impacted by that social construction. Yeah. This is contrasted with 5.0, which is now a new individual, a new MetAware individual is emerging. They don't know who they are. Who am I? And so now they're seeing that other individuals, they're projecting other individuals are making up stuff. Not social construction. That person is individually those words are empty.
Right.
And so what you'll start to see is they'll start making up weird definitions for things. So like if I asked someone to finish the sentence, life is, maybe someone in 2.0 might say, life is good. Or maybe someone a little bit later might say, life is a really good challenge and an opportunity for learning. Maybe that's orangish, like an orange kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So those are kind of in the realm of generally socially agreed upon normal definitions, where 5.0 might be like, well, life is, an unfolding pattern of history. And it's also, the emptiness of something. And then they'll go on and so they'll start saying these things that are not typical definitions. They're either unusual or there's many of them.
Yeah.
Which lets you know that they see that, definitions are kind of fluid.
Right. And like in my understanding of it, there's also an idea that, starting at 4.5, we can see that projection plays a big part of the human experience, emotional, traumatic, etc. But at 5.0, you begin to appreciate that, in essence, we're projecting a human experience onto reality everywhere we touch it. And it's kind of uniform. Well, and therefore, in a sense, arbitrary.
Right. It's made
without being nihilistic and without being therefore devoid of meaning, because that's not really the way that I understand the insight.
Right. Although one of the shadows of 5.0 can be nihilism. Mm-hmm. It's not baked into the healthy flourishing of that wave, but it is a place where people can go. Some people's experience in 5.0 is eventually they sort of come to like a deep peace where nothing really has meaning, but there's an embodied peace along with it. Whereas others can fall into, well, nothing matters, and they can kind of be more of a nihilistic experience, especially if there's not people around them supporting them. And the other thing I'll mention is that as the person is projecting this dissolution of boundaries, sometimes what they do is they throw a bomb into their life, and they quit their job, they get a divorce, they want to travel around India or somewhere. And the thing is, I'll often tell clients that I work with that are moving through this particular wave, I'm like, you can deconstruct all of reality in a bubble bath. Like, you don't have to get the divorce. It's like when I work with people, I don't give them advice, but when I see them moving into 5.0, there's typically a conversation that we have around that impulse to just destroy everything is it's a natural inclination because boundaries are coming down. But the thing is they're going to get active again when we move on and talk about 5.5.
Right.
Sometimes they regret that their whole life has been burnt to a crisp because now at some point they want to do something.
Right.
And they have to start from the ground up sometimes. And there's ways to lovingly deconstruct everything, but not have to dissolve all of the structures in the external world.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I from my personal experience, I recall pretty deeply the sort of idea of feeling sort of deeply adrift. There was a lot of opening for sort of trauma to come up. Yeah. There was fear over, am I going to be okay? Because I actually can't find a self like that's concrete to point to. So it felt very disorienting and at times terrifying. Yeah. And then the real kick in the caboose was also being kind of okay with all that at the same time. So it was this sort of terrible paradox of panic and okayness that was just impossible to explain to other people. Like, are you okay? I actually am okay, but I'm actually not okay at all.
That's right. Yeah, ask someone who has, some of the MetAware stages as a part of their experience of being human, ask them like, how are you doing? And they look at you like you're crazy. They're like, how could I even start? And so one of the things that'll happen with 5.0 is they'll have, because transpersonal awareness is starting to sort of be in the background, sort of streaming in, they'll start having thoughts that are kind of quicker than typical thinking. And you'll ask them a question and like 5 different thought streams will kind of drop at once and smash. And so often, not often, it's possible. I've seen it be like this. I've seen it not be like this, where language can get a little stuttered and a little wonky because everything is happening all at once and they haven't yet sorted out what all of this is.
Right, because it's that 0.0 stage. So like the other ones, you're awash in it. And so you are what's arising rather than having what's arising. And what's arising is this.
That's right.
Is this, yeah. And so using the metaphor of like turning towards source or turning towards self or this hierarchy, it sounds like then at 5.0, you're beginning to see source through self.
So one way to say this is like the beginning of the absolute is starting to arise without state training.
Right. So it's not it's not this. It's
right.
It's,
There's something coming in that they may not be looking directly at source. If we're just talking about this developmentally and not as if someone's gone through like a rigorous state training, right? They're just bumbling along in the world being a person. They haven't found all of the integral somethings. They're just being a person in the world.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the absolute begins to waft in, but they don't know what this is yet. So the source is coming in, but they don't know what it is. But when they look at the world, they start seeing that there's a bit of the melting of boundaries. That what seemed to be solid and fixed, it's starting to soften. In the colors, Wilbur, when he uses the word turquoise, and then he describes it, sometimes in my listening, he's describing advanced 4.5, and sometimes he's describing 5.0. He puts it together. Also, sometimes early 5.5 also can fit within some of the turquoise.
Okay.
So it's kind of one of those places where Wilbur's colors don't exactly line up, and there's a bit of an overlap. And one of the beauties, I think, of Terry's model is it helps us get really precise.
Yeah.
What do we mean? Do we mean advanced teal that has a capacity for really like nuanced systems thinking? What about
And that maybe having powerful state experiences of
maybe having powerful
both
state
witnessing, Toria or Toria Tita, beyond when the witness actually collapses and just pure witness, pure subjectivity with no witness, right? These are very, very
Could.
advanced states, right?
Could, if they're training or they have some sort of a inclination, we could
Yeah,
say.
a karma, we might say.
Yeah, I was going to say karma, and then I was like, well, or inclination, depending on how people, But 5.0 can also be a turquoise. It's not complex though. They have complexity. They have more complexity than 4.5 teal, but it doesn't sound, and this is also really important to bring up, it doesn't often sound more complex. And so this is where teal, who sometimes will put themselves at the frothing edge of evolution. They're like, whatever the highest stage is, that's where I must be. They'll see 5.0 in its unstable boundary weirdness, and they'll say, oh, you're just green.
It's a 4.0. You're awash in multi-perspectival madness, clearly.
Because they're like, well, nothing matters.
Yeah, because in a sense they are.
What's happened is
one of the differences is that it's. Sorry, I was going to say one of the differences is that it's individual, not socially oriented.
Yeah, what we can say is that in the 0.0s, there's more of a relativism view. This could be 2.0, 3, whatever it is. And so 5.0 is a more advanced relativism.
Ah, I like that.
Right? And so it's building on the relativism that we might see in 4.0, but it has more capacity. It's a different kind of relativism. I like to use the word awaring, and this comes from Gebser. When he uses I play with it a little bit. Like when he puts the prefix a, he doesn't mean like negative. Like if we were to say amoral, it usually means like no morals. When Gebser uses the word a, like aperspectival, he means it in the positive sense, meaning free from.
Yeah.
So I like the word awaring. It's like it's free from a particular perspective. You could say aperspectival. It's just awaring is prettier, but it's like you're freer from perspectives, which to 4.5 teal, which really likes to rank perspectives.
Yeah.
If they don't really understand 5.0 because they haven't touched it yet, or they haven't listened to this conversation or a conversation like this, instead of understanding it as yet a different perspective that requires being met in a new way, it can drop them into the sort of teal shadow of, oh, you're just being so green, like you can't like take a stand on anything. And they're like, well, that's because everything is made up, and life is like an unfolding, wonky like turkey. And they're like, I don't even know what you're saying, dude. Like, there's structure in this world, and like things matter. I've been fighting for it because of my purposeful heart. And they're like, you're making that up. And they're like, you're so green. And it's like, well, actually, they're not. They're at a different edge of unfolding and discovery.
That's fascinating, yeah. And I mean, I remember my younger days in the integral circles, certainly running into people that, in hindsight, were clearly at 5.0. And the hallmark, I would say, was a sense of feeling sort of a little confused initially, which now I know when I meet someone and I feel confused to slow down and pay attention because they may be making meaning beyond my capacity. But it's that confusion and then the compulsion, right, to get on top of it and understand it, which is sort of a drive of 4.5. Teal.
Exactly. So is there anything else you want to explore about 5.0, or do you want to move into the next one?
Let's move it up. Let me pull up the little graph again. But yeah, I think that's good.
So what we've been exploring is this entry into a new world space, into a new tier. This is a new ontology. Remember, ontology is the study of what is reality, what is real. Each world space, each tier is unpacking that question in its own unique way. So when we enter into the MetAware, we're entering into a whole new sense of what reality is. And some of it involves melting away some of the previous certainties. Now, as we move into the fifth person perspective, what we said was that 5.0 is the emerging expression of the fifth person perspective. 5.5, it's now the maturing aspect of the fifth person perspective. So what starts to happen here is we're able to begin to get active with this notion that things are constructed. Whereas in 5.0, there's this, the echoes of transpersonal awareness is reorganizing our whole experience, and things are falling, like melting, and boundaries are melting away. 5.5 now has meta-awareness. They're able to now look at that transpersonal awareness and say, hey, look, I'm witnessing awareness. I'm witnessing awareness. Now, you can take a course and they're going to talk about witnessing awareness. Like you can take a meditation class and they're going to talk about witnessing awareness. So we have to be really careful here. I could be in 4.0 green, take a Buddhist retreat, and the teacher is talking about witnessing awareness, and I can start using those words, witnessing awareness. But what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about source. I'm talking about a state. And so 5.5, the maturing fifth person perspective, it needs to have the state of being aware of awareness. Mm-hmm. You can have that experience earlier with training or grace or karma.
Dumb luck.
Whatever.
Hammer hits you on the head, yeah.
Hammer hits you on the head, right? You can have that earlier. The difference here, and I really hope that this becomes clearer for all of us, it's that in 5.5, you need that.
Yeah.
You don't need it in 2.0. That doesn't mean you can't have it.
Right.
It's just when you look out into the world in 2.0, you're going to see a 2.0 world. Now, 5.5, when they look into the world, they're going to build upon all of this boundary falling away that 5.0 began, because this is the maturing fifth person perspective. So they're going to start saying, okay, so there's that Chinese medicine thing over here. There's this Buddhist tradition over there. There's developmental theory over here. There's this other system of understanding emotions over there. And all of those boundaries of all of those systems that take themselves so seriously and really want to keep their teachings pure, 5.5 can be like, well, but all those boundaries are fluid.
Constructs.
They're constructs. So
and in a sense, relatively arbitrary.
Right. So I want, as 5.5 I want to begin weaving these things together.
Right. Right.
And so,
because they're all like threads in a tapestry that you said.
They're all threads in a tapestry. And what you're getting in 5.5 is the mature individual MetAware, the mature MetAware individual.
And it's active, not receptive.
Right, because it's a 0.5.
Because it's a 0.5.
Right, and so you have 1.5. I want what this like
the toddler,
red, like kind of red toddler. I want what 2-year-old. I want what I want when I want it. And then you have 3.5. Oh, I'm genetically modifying that stuff because I want to change the world, right?
Right.
And then 5.5 is like, oh, you want me to like keep those traditions separate? Well, I'm the cosmic dream weaver. I'm the weaver of dreams. I'm going to take this cosmic efflorescence and I'm going to weave it into this other thing. And so what you start to see is the language gets a lot more complicated. It's probably some of the most complicated language that you'll hear in all of the MetAware.
Because it's an active 0.5.
Because it's an active individual 0.5, and it doesn't always, but it can have this feeling of like, well, let's take this like, metagenetic, cross structure and like meld it in with the unfolding of an infinite like, floral mousse. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to, it's just, there's such an ease with bending constructs.
And whereas the 4.5 would although they're aware they have a frame, that they're looking through a frame, what will we say? They're attached to their frame?
Well, it's not as loose. It feels structured. It's like there's levels and there's lines.
But that's actually not up for negotiation. That's almost a fixed reality.
It can be.
Whereas at 5.5, it would be like, well, developmental lens too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
There's a feeling to it. In 4.5, it's like there's levels, there's lines, there's structure stages, there's state stages, there's quadrants. It's like there's a kind of like, so if I was looking through that lens, I'm like, okay, I want to understand Keith. So I'm going to look at the structure stage lens. I'm going to look at the state lens. I'm going to look at the 4 quadrants. There's a kind of like this all fits together in a perfectly sort of elegant system. 5.5 is like, oh yeah, man, all that's made up. But if it's useful, let's go with it. Because 5.5, they start to understand, and this is something that I think Ken Wilber has brought forward that's sort of become lesser known or lesser explored, is his integral post-metaphysics.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, I think integral post-metaphysics really starts to arise at a 5.5 perspective. And what I mean by this, in case listeners don't know what that is, integral post-metaphysics recognizes that epistemology, the lens through which I know the world, and the very real world, the ontology, arise together. You'll see some philosophies that will favor the knower. They'll say, oh, it's all coming from the knower. You'll have other philosophies that'll favor ontology. Well, if you there's a real world out there, you just have to trip over it and look through the right microscope, and you're going to find the real world. 5.5 says, yeah, no, it's more fluid than that. Your epistemological, your knowing lens is born simultaneously with a reality. As the lens broadens and deepens, the reality broadens and deepens. It's not just the looker. It's the looker and the real are closer together than in the earlier stages. And
right.
So
sorry. Just a fusion of ontology and epistemology is what you're saying. Whereas ontology really would be the hallmark of 3.5, and the epistemological point of view is really going to be the hallmark of 4.0, generally speaking, if you're an academic and philosopher and that kind of things, right?
Right, and so here we start seeing those come together. And so back to your question, it's like they'll be able to look at integral theory and they'll be like, well, I mean, it's all made up, but is it functionally useful? Right. And because it's all made up, and I can ask if it's functionally useful, I can also ask the question, well, it's like 80% functionally useful. So I'm going to take in these 3 other systems that are not usually included in integral theory, and I'm going to weave them in this really creative, exciting way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's going to create a new set of constructs that's going to then help the world in a new kind of way. Now, I'm speaking from a very verbal perspective that is inclined to teach people things, right? So it's a projection of my own, like what I do. But sure. I want to be clear, because often 5.5, it's of all of my clients, when people are moving through 5.5, the comment that they feel unseen by a particular developmental model that's trying to describe them is the highest. It's very common for the 5th person perspective to not feel seen because they don't have a reciprocity that's going to come up at 6th person perspective. And so I want to say, just to speak to that, not everyone moving through 5.5 is this active, verbal, weaving meta models together. I know people that are artists, that their speaking is quite simple, but if you ask them their relationship to art, they're going to show you how they're weaving all of these art systems together, but not conceptually, visually, from their heart,
intuitively.
And so I just want to make sure to mention that, because sometimes the written descriptions of 5.5 can be misleading for some people, and I don't want to make the same mistake in our conversation.
No, I appreciate that. To me, it goes back to Wilber's idea, and I don't know if he was the one that first proposed this, but the lines of intelligence. That there can be these insights can arise in different ways that are not just the cognitive.
That's right. That's right. And some people are less verbal just in general. Like I've always been a very verbal person. So no matter what I do, it's been very verbal with lots of words. I have some clients where, they move into 5.5 and they're not they don't talk funny. Like sometimes 5.5, it just sounds
you talk funny.
You talk funny. I mean, it's really, and it's like when we're looking at stages inventories and we're reading 5.5, sometimes it'll be this, it's just this rolling this thing into the next thing into the next thing. Like the infinite doors is like a mirror of your own true face, which is falling through to the, the rising of the efflorescing. And one of the things that Terry talks about, which is so true, is sometimes with 5.5, by the time you get to the end of reading what they've said or listening to what they've said, you have no idea what they said in the beginning.
Sure, makes total sense.
And I want to say that to contrast it with, I've also met folks in 5.5 that just don't do that.
Yeah.
They just don't do that. But if you press them on how they make meaning, the deep structure is all there. Yeah. And this is one of the beauties of Terry's model, is that it doesn't require that you show up in a certain way, content-wise. The deep structures are what we're listening for. And so the more textural, somatic, heart-centered human, they may not have all the words, but you'll still be able to hear the structures if you listen closely.
Yeah, and the emphasis, I remember years ago I met with a guy named Father Thomas Keating, who was sort of was Trappist monk, I guess, here in Colorado, and very luminous heart. And the only way I could describe the energetic and the way that he experienced the universe was entirely through his heart.
Yeah.
And so his language was okay, but it was more of his, it's very hard to describe, it was more of his presence. It was more of his profoundly evolved love of and relationship with God. And it blew all my circuits out because it was completely beyond my capacity to understand what the hell he was beaming at me. But he wasn't giving me a lecture, right? It was something else entirely.
Exactly.
And it really helped, in some ways, change the course of how I understood the universe, which is that I'm very head-centered, but some people are deeply heart-centered, and some people are deeply body-centered. And to your point, this evolutionary unfolding can happen through any of those centers, and probably more.
Yeah. And also what you're describing with him is a depth dimension. Yeah. I didn't talk about this, but, states and stages can unfold interdependently. That's something that I think Terry has beautifully sort of discovered. And then the Wilber-Combs lattice, it shows that states and stages are independent. And what I'd like to invite is that they're both true. It's a both and. There's ways in which states and stages are independent, but there's also ways in which they have an interdependency, and there's a way that they can grow together in a healthy person.
Yeah.
So it's just like in Chinese medicine, we first learn the pulse. We learn what a healthy pulse is, so that we can then reference everything else in relationship to that. We can look at, well, what would healthy development look like? There'd be an interdependent growing together of growing up and growing deep.
Yeah.
That would be the healthy ideal. And then we look at what's actually happening. I've met people that are in the fifth person perspective that are quite at the surface because they're jacked up on coffee and they're overworking.
Hey, I'm sitting right here. Come on.
Not you. And then there's people that are, in a very earlier developmental wave as their primary way of making meaning, but they've cultivated great depth. So we can see the independence of it, but then we can also see how they can work together.
Yeah, beautiful.
So
beautiful.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You had a thought you want to finish.
I was just wanting to just review, just kind of come back. So in 5.0, we feel the impressions of the absolute. but we don't really know what's happening yet. And then when we look at the world, what we see in the world is there's things are starting to the boundaries are starting to fray. The things that used to mean everything now are starting to melt. 5.5 is now the 0.5, so it's maturing fifth person perspective. It's now able to look at the absolute a little bit more fully as a feature of the structure of the stage.
Right.
And so now it can see, it's aware of awareness. It can witness awareness. And then when it looks at the world, it can start to see a world where multiple paradigms can be woven together, cross-paradigmatic, meta-paradigmatic, and even if they don't use those words or walk in circles that use funny language like, the trans-post-meta model of, infinite becoming, you'll see that they're seeing a world where those things can be woven together even as they might not be speaking like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to hit two more things relatively briefly here. And one is a question, which is that it seems to me, and I'm curious if you would agree with this, that the spiritual traditions of history, by and large, when they are talking about versions of awakening or enlightenment or, coming into full contact with Christos or any of these sort of ideas, Atman and Brahman become one, or Turiya Tita or Turiya Zen, all these things, that really they're really speaking to the maturation of a state experience where it matures into sort of a state stage, as Wilbur would say. And we would know that because that's them, in your words, looking at the absolute or looking at source, and when they turn and then explain to us through their writings and teachings, it's easier for us to gauge that it's coming from a particular stage that is not 5.0. So said another way, awakening, enlightenment seem to occur. It doesn't seem like the masters of old are talking about 5.0 or 5.5 or 6.0 at all.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
this is a guess, right?
But what I would sort of take from what you're saying is that, yes, we don't want to assume that when someone is speaking about these absolute states, that it automatically means we're talking about these later stages.
Right.
And this is where I see a huge confusion that occurs a lot.
Yeah.
What we need to know is, well, what reality do those sages and mystics see?
Yeah.
What
are they seeing through might be another way to see it.
Sure. And exactly. What's empty?
What's empty? Or the rule's
Right.
empty? Or my
Right.
persona's empty? Right? Is the
Right.
whole construct of a human world empty? Is
Right.
awareness itself empty? What's
Right.
empty?
Right. So exactly. So just to kind of build on that, it's like, okay, I turn towards source. I'm in touch with the timeless, boundless. I can see that that's the ultimate reality if I'm going to use that kind of language, right? And then I turn towards the world and I say the mountain is unreal. And that's what I say. The mountain is unreal. My role is unreal. My role as a parent is unreal. And that's all concrete stuff.
Right.
Can I see that contexts are unreal? I have to see the context before I can see that it's empty. I have to see the cross-paradigmatic meta model of multiple interweavings in order to see that that's empty. Otherwise, I'm seeing a mountain and I'm in the concrete world and I have an awakening experience. Maybe I've stabilized it like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that was one, as a long time Zen practitioner, I would say a lot of their writings really speak to seeing through the concrete, seeing through the rules themselves, seeing through oh, it's adorable that you think that I'm a teacher up on this pedestal and we're supposed to do all these, they really cut. What do? It's sort of the idea of, it came from Zen. If you see Buddha on the side of the road, kill him, right? That's
Right.
a very concrete way to show, right, that it's
Exactly.
like, don't trust teachers, don't trust teachings. What do you trust? Your experience. That's it.
Right. Right. It doesn't say if you see Buddha, in a contextual field of cross-paradigmatic interweaving, slice it all to bits. It doesn't say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to just touch on that at least a little bit. And then maybe, I don't want to get too much into this because I think there's a risk of this generating more confusion than clarity, but maybe just touch on 6.0 and 6.5, just so we have a sort of a sense of what this MetAware tier ultimately has the potential to grow into.
Exactly. So we've been seeing that all along. We've been an unfolding of a human world, which is characterized by self-reflection. We experience separation in the way that most other things that have arisen over the last 13.7 billion years don't experience. And as a part of that, we've been grappling with these questions of what does it mean to be an individual? What does it mean to be a collective? And we've been exploring that also through these six person perspectives. So far, we've talked about 5 of them. Each person perspective has an emerging aspect and a maturing aspect. In that, we've been exploring what does it mean to be in space? What does it mean to be something unfolding in time? And then we get into the MetAware and we start dissolving space in 5.0. And then one of the things that comes up in 5.5 that we didn't talk about yet is they start deconstructing time. First, as a evolutionary object. Time is this thing and it's not real. And you'll start hearing they'll say, oh, the past, present, and future are all arising right now because they're deconstructing time. At the end of 5.5, what starts to occur is timelessness, which is an experience of the absolute. Right? It's different than time as a construct. It's experiencing timelessness. Starts coming up at 5.5. Now, as we move into 6.0, now, because of the dissolution that's occurred in 5.0, opening us to the possibility for boundlessness, that's where there is no space.
Right.
And 5.5 deconstructs time and then opens us into the experience of the timeless.
Right.
Now we enter into 6.0 and we're going into a collective stage. So now there's a MetAware collective. One aspect is the absolute. One aspect is the relative. So these are primary polarities that the whole MetAware tier is exploring. It begins to be sort of opened through the 5th person perspective, but in the 6th person perspective, now we can more fully see these 2 different polarities in our direct experience because of the dissolution process that's occurred in 5.0 and 5.5. So we have, when we're looking at the absolute, we're now able to see more clearly and cleanly. We're able to see timelessness and boundlessness. Timelessness is the direct experience of something that does not move. It's crystal clear. And it doesn't move in time. Boundlessness, there's no change. It's unchanging. It doesn't have any boundaries. It doesn't have any location. So we can experience timeless boundlessness. It's not like I'm experiencing timeless boundlessness inside me. It's everywhere because there is no insides or outsides. It's
another construct.
Right. It's another construct, but now they're feeling it.
Yeah.
Right? They're feeling it because if 5.0 says that is a construct, 6.0 is going to start touching it. Again, you can do it earlier, but it's going to have to start coming up more on its own.
Right.
From a developmental perspective.
And when you say touching it in an experiential, felt, embodied,
Correct.
like a knowing.
A knowing.
How do you know that? I just know it.
It's a direct experience because the senses, right? Because the senses are growing up the whole time. They start with 1.0 and they grow up and get more and more refined. And so there's a subtler, very subtle sensor that starts to come up here. Now, that's the absolute side. The relative side is looking at very big holes, all of existence.
Oh, very big
All-
holes. WHOLE.
WHOLES. Very
That was like a
big
big hole.
No, there's a big interdependent, vast existence.
Yeah.
I'm less interested in like the interweaving of meta models and like all of this complexity. All of a sudden things get really simple and vast. And all of a sudden, you see some churches are called like Sacred Heart Church. All of a sudden, someone is like, oh, that's what you mean. Because there's a quality of love that's permeating the field, that's pouring through this being that doesn't have boundaries. So they're now, what happens is the absolute and the relative start having a reciprocity together. People start saying like, things are like soaked by this love, soaked by this timeless boundlessness. Things are saturated. There's a relationship that's occurring. They still have them separate though. There's still two things that are in reciprocity with each other.
Right. They're flowing between the two, like a polarity, kind of.
Yeah. And the key is, I just want to keep coming back to this because I feel like it's so important. Yes, you can be in 2.5 and have a heart opening and experience big love. 6.0, it's going to happen without that. You don't need to have a sacred heart of the big love. Right. You don't need that for 2.5 to be healthy. In order for 6.0 to have its deep structure, we need that.
Right.
Part of it.
Right.
Part of it. Because what's happening is the absolute and the relative are going to get closer together. So in 5.0, the boundless starts to become possible. In 5.5, the timeless starts to open, right? So now we're beginning to be able to clarify a little bit more as we go into 6.0. Okay, now we have the absolute and the relative. We're in direct relationship with both as a regular feature of our meaning making and direct experience. That way they can start to come together so that in 6.5 they begin to interpenetrate. So the absolute and the relative start to interpenetrate more and more. In 6.5 it's a 0.5 stage, so it's the maturing, and there's a trajectory. So now the person is able to see again. 6.0 is not really focused on like the details of like there's a pebble and like there's a flower. Like, yes, they can see that stuff, but sometimes it's just this big love that's like, oh my God.
Well, they're swimming in the soup again.
They're swimming in a soup that's like, oh my God. It's the most, sacred. 6.5, they start to see trajectory again.
Yeah.
They start to see that within that loving field, within the timeless, boundless awareness, there's an evolving cosmos that starts. The ground of the cosmos is the world of matter. The flowing emergence from matter is the world of life. Then comes the world of the self-reflective mind. This is the world of humanity. Mm-hmm. And the key of humanity is that there's a looker. There's an observer. Right. And so it's possible that, 6.5 is coming to terms with all of this collapsing into itself, preparing itself for whatever comes next, where there's no longer a witness.
Right. The collapse of the witness, where there's just pure arising.
It's pure arising. And again, we can speculate about what comes later. The research we have is up to 6.5.
Yeah.
There's
those, I presume, are rare as hen's teeth, as they would say?
It's rare.
Yeah.
The six-person perspective is fairly rare, and I would say even further that the six-person perspective is very rare in a robust way also, even rarer.
That would make sense because, well, for one, developmentally, you're kind of a bit out on a limb by yourself, so you're not going to cocktail parties, the 6.0 cocktail party.
Right, and this is where I find, throughout the whole MetAware actually, often when I have clients that are going into the MetAware, I'll invite them to explore, really good systems and state training, because just as you want to clean up shadow, it's really helpful to clean up relationship to states, because
interesting.
in 6.0 and 6.5, it becomes really important that the balance between the absolute and the relative is really solid. And you have a really robust relationship to timeless boundlessness, which is on the absolute side. And you have a really robust relationship to eternity and infinity, time that goes on forever, space that goes on forever, which is part of the relative.
Right.
You want to have those really well balanced, just like any polarity. If both sides of the polarity are balanced, then when they go to integrate, it doesn't integrate in a weird lopsided way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Makes total sense. And it's at the edge, just to be perfectly candid, it's like I can feel myself getting fuzzy. Right. As I'm listening to you, it's like I have to keep focusing back in, because I can literally feel that you're talking over my head, and so I can conceptually get it.
Yeah.
But I have no felt sense of what you're talking about. So it's an interesting to sit here and go, Keith, pay attention. Keith, pay attention.
Right. Yeah.
And I just want to reflect that to anyone who's watching this, that's part of the humility of this process is recognizing when someone is speaking over our head and just celebrating that. Oh, wonderful. More things, more places to go in the future, maybe.
Yeah. And, and what I would encourage along those lines, which I think is really, it's important what you're bringing up. I tend to look at development as distributed.
Yeah.
Whereas in integral world, a lot of times the focus is on like, where am I at? Where are you at? Are you
leading edge?
Like who's above me? Who's below me? And it's like that kind of thing. Another way to look at it is like, the world has all of these waves of development expressed in some aspect of us as a collective body of human beings. And just like even if somebody's over your head, for the most part, 6-person perspective, things change there a little bit. They want to belong. So even if someone's at, 4.5 teal, and we're talking about 5.0 or 5.5, and that feels over their head, those folks, they still want to belong.
Yeah.
There's still people that even if we don't understand the contours of their experience, it doesn't mean that they're like better or they're just fine. I know this because people come and see me and want help, and they're suffering, there's suffering in 5.0, there's suffering in 5.5, there can be suffering in 6.0, there can even be suffering in 6.5. Things change there. But I'm just saying that this is just like, it's not a ranking. The purpose isn't for ranking.
Yeah.
It's like, how do we love the person we don't understand? And that can happen both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a surrender to just being on, at least for me, there's a surrender to just being on this wheel of unfolding.
Yeah.
And the freedom for me is knowing that I'll always be on the wheel.
Yeah.
Which
until the whole
wheel goes away, right? Right. Anyway, okay. I think we've covered enough. that's quite a comprehensive.
We did everything in we did a lot in a short time.
Covered a lot of territory. Okay, so Alexander, if people want to know more about you, they want to work with you, they want to, hear more about what you're up to, where would they find more?
Yeah, there's 2 places. They can go to eoslearningcollective.com. EOS. Yeah, okay. EOS learningcollective.com. And then people can also find me at the newfieldnetwork.com. That's where I do most of my teaching and facilitating others. And so, and I also, once a year, usually I do a Recognizing Stages course with Stages International, where, Terry and Kim Barta's organization. And so I also do that there.
Which I took last year, and it was very helpful, because you sort of go through each stage and sort of deconstruct what that stage is all about and how to recognize what that stage is. So it's very cool and very helpful.
Okay.
So wonderful. Okay, my friend. Well, thank you everybody once more for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye for now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.